The Honorable Senator Crystal Haynes, Her Excellency Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of CARICOM, and Mr. Lloyd Pandey, His Excellency Mr. Wayne McCook, Assistant Secretary General of CARICOM, Ms. Paul Breyer, Permanent Secretary, acting in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Professor Clive Landis, Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill Campus, Mrs. Julie Arthur, wife of the late Professor, the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, and members of the Arthur family, Ms. Marla Dukaran, economist and advisor, and tonight's distinguished guest speaker, Professor Troy Lord, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill Campus, members of the panel, members of the university community, representatives of CARICOM, representatives of the Central Bank of Barbados, representatives of Afri-Exim Bank, sponsors of the 4th Distinguished Owen Arthur Memorial Lecture, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening to all those of you gathered here in the Walcott Werner Theater of the Cave Hill Campus's Errol Barrow Center of Creative Imagination, and to all of you watching online from all over the Caribbean and the world from the comfort of your homes. My name is Dr. Jani Vremi, and I am the director of the Sridath Ramphal Center for International Trade Law Policy and Services, or the SRC, based right here on the beautiful Cave Hill campus in Barbados. It is my pleasure this evening to be your mistress of ceremonies for the 4th Distinguished Owen Seymour Arthur Memorial DOSAM Lecture in honor of the life and work of the formidable 5th Prime Minister of Barbados and Professor of Practice at the Cave Hill campus, in whose name we gather once again tonight. As we do so, let me ask you to share with me 1 minute of silence to honor another one of Barbados' sons of the soil who also made his mark on this campus. Sir Keith Hunt, past principal of Cave Hill campus, died yesterday, having served as the campus's 3rd principal from 1983 to 2002. I'll ask you to share with me a minute of silence in his honor. Thank you very much. In the same vein of memory, it would also be remiss of me as director of the center, the SRC, at this, our annual most important public outreach event, not to also remember our namesake, Sir Sridath Sunny Ramphal, who also left us in August this year. Like Owen Arthur, who we commemorate through the series, he was a regionalist who heeded the call to do more than just serve country, but labor also in the vineyard to advance this region's collective development interests at key junctures in our Caribbean's trajectory. I'm going to slightly abuse my privilege as mistress of ceremonies to take you down a very short memory lane. As the center, we inaugurated this lecture series on September 8, 2021, in the height of the COVID pandemic, and just over a year following the passing of Owen Arthur. When we decided to start the series, it was our intention to use it to highlight and celebrate the work of Owen Arthur in the field of trade, one of the few economists and frankly experts in the region who really had a good grasp of the economics of trade, but more importantly, understood the importance of trade to the region given our smallness, our historic dependence as small, open economies. I quote from that night in 2021. Tonight's event is part of the SRC's ambitious outreach agenda where we pay homage to one of the great Caribbean leaders known for his inimitable and intrepid style, incisive and scholarly mind, and undeniable gravitas in the field of regional and international trade policy. Some would say he laid the ground for the class of Caribbean leader with an unwavering commitment to regional integration and a strong sense of place in international affairs that belies our small geographic size. End of quote. We are an institution that takes pride in commemorating our past giants, while we continue to do our small part in creating the new giants of the region through our flagship Masters in International Trade Policy, or MIT, program, and I know we have some of our cohort present and past here, which has churned out hundreds of graduates who are the region's current and future trade experts, business persons, negotiators, academics, who grace the corridors of trade, finance, sustainability policy all over the world. We singled out Owen Arthur because his life's work gelled nicely with the core mandate of our center to advance the region's development by training, motivating, and molding young people, something Owen Arthur felt strongly about because, as you can see, the trajectories of so many current trade diplomats I encounter have been graced by his Midas touch. His thinking, the region's stance on issues like tax, smallness, openness, regional integration, SIDS, sustainability, industrial policy, all topics that have taken on renewed life in this current discourse, or in no small part to his seminal and early thinking on these topics. We also have a mandate of advocacy, and he encouraged us as small countries to lift our voices unapologetically in every room we graced. We also singled out Owen Arthur because he was our neighbor upstairs on our campus building, a building that in his passing now bears his name. Quoting again from the night in 2021, we said, while Professor the Right Honorable Owen Seymour Arthur, or PM as we like to call him, was many things in life, for us who shared a common space with him on the UE premises, he was a frequent visitor, a devoted mentor, an exacting taskmaster, an unrelenting debater, and a dear friend. We miss him dearly at the center, and this month, on the 17th of October, he would have been 75 years old. Remember that number, folks, tonight, 75, it'll come back. PM, we continue to labor in the hope that we do you proud through our continued work and efforts in your name to promote regional scholarship by fostering independent and robust thinking among young people. And throughout the course of this evening, we will share with you gradually some of the efforts we have made to ensure his legacy lives on. So back to this evening, now that you've allowed me to take a short walk down memory lane. We launched the series 4 years ago, and we continue even today to work with some of our seminal and early partners. UWITV was live streaming that event and continues to be one of our partners. And UWITV is now available regionally on Stream Blue app. We encourage persons to follow the conversations and all UWITV content being broadcast across the region on the Stream Blue app. We continue to share this event with the family of Owen Arthur, represented by Mrs. Julie Arthur and members of her family. And online, I know we have Leah, and in person here we have Sabrina and her daughter. We continue to feature our distinguished guest lecturers, Caribbean economists, starting from hygienist Jean Leon, who opened in 2021. Dr. Carla Barnett, CARICOM Secretary General, was our second, and she's here with us today. Welcome. Our third was Dr. Kevin Greenidge, the Governor of the Central Bank, and tonight we have the esteemed speaker, Caribbean economist, Miss Marla Dukaran, who will grace the stage a little bit later. What we do with these series is encourage persons to ponder, probe, and provoke thinking on trade. I'm very proud to see that the series has grown. We now have sponsors, the Central Bank of Barbados, our gold sponsors, Gordon's Enterprises Limited, Unicoma, RF Merchant Bank and Trust, and the Caribbean Export Development Agency. Very proud to have you standing side by side with us tonight. So having now sufficiently abused my position, let's continue with our program tonight. And if you would allow me, please help me to welcome, to give opening remarks, Professor Clive Landis, the Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the Cave Hill Campus and Chair of the SRC's Advisory Board. Thank you.
When I next chair the SRC board meeting, I think I will have to abuse my position as well. Dr. Jani Remy, our MC tonight, Director of the Shridhar Ramphal Center for International Trade, Law, Policy and Services, the Honorable Sandra Husbands, Minister of State in the Ministry of Educational, Technological and Vocational Training, and our Parliamentary Representative for St. James South, Her Excellency Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of CARICOM. So nice to have you here as our past speaker supporting our current distinguished speaker. His Excellency Mr. Wayne McCook, Assistant Secretary General of CARICOM. Miss Ashley Lashley, the Youth Ambassador of CARICOM. Miss Paula Bayer, Permanent Secretary acting in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Mrs. Julie Arthur, wife of the late Professor, the Right Honourable Owen Arthur, and members of the Arthur family, both here and online. Miss Marla Dukaran, economist and advisor, and our distinguished speaker tonight. Professor Troy Lord, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, members of the panel, members of the university community, representatives of CARICOM, representatives of the Central Bank of Barbados, representatives of the Afrexim Bank, sponsors of the 4th Distinguished Owen Arthur Memorial Lecture, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a very pleasant good evening to all. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you, both here and online, to the University of the West Indies Cave Hill Campus for the 4th Annual Distinguished Owen Seymour Arthur Memorial Lecture. This evening, we honor the memory and legacy of someone whose tireless commitment to regional integration, economic advancement, and social equity has left an indelible mark on our collective history in Barbados and the wider Caribbean. Owen Arthur was a man of vision and passion, a true champion of the CARICOM single market and economy, who believed that our shared prosperity as a region depended on our ability to come together in pursuit of common goals. His legacy continues to inspire us as we face new challenges in an ever-evolving global landscape. This annual event is not only tribute to one of the most eminent leaders our region has produced, it is also a critical opportunity for us to engage in thoughtful and transformative dialogue around the most pressing issues affecting the Caribbean. Tonight, we are privileged to have one of the Caribbean's leading economists, Ms. Marla Dukeran, delivering what promises to be a thought-provoking, possibly even a controversial lecture on the theme Tax Justice for the Caribbean? The topic of tax justice is both timely and necessary. In a world where income inequality continues to widen and where the burden of taxation can fall disproportionately on those least able to bear it, the question of whether our current tax systems are equitable and just demands attention. For the Caribbean, this issue takes on even greater significance as we grapple with the dual imperatives of fostering economic growth while ensuring that the benefits of this growth are shared broadly and fairly across all sectors of society. Owen Arthur understood that economic fairness is one of the cornerstones of sustainable development. And during his tenure as Prime Minister of Barbados, he took the fight for tax justice to the world stage. In 1990, challenging what he boldly described as technocratic tyranny coming from the OECD, he spoke out against the double standards that allowed wealthy nations to maintain their own tax practices while seeking to limit the Caribbean's ability to compete. This initiative eventually halted the OECD's efforts, if only for a time. Those who today witness Prime Minister Mir Amor Motley's fight for climate justice on the global stage must surely get a sense of déjà vu as we recall the Arthur-led fight for tax justice. In many ways, it is now, as it was then, a fight for justice and sovereignty. Arthur's courage and tenacity in standing up for justice against much larger forces serves as a reminder and an inspiration to our academic community here at the UWITV campus that we have the capacity to defend our interests and chart our own course. For, in spite of its small size, the UWI at Cave Hill punches above its weight when it comes to making an impact with our teaching and research. Let me share just a few recent examples of how we are driving innovation and national development in Barbados and beyond. Only recently, we received high commendation for our pioneering role in renewable energy as Barbados unveiled the world's first vehicle powered by renewable natural gas derived from sargassum. This groundbreaking project was this lovely indigenous mix of sargassum and mixed with the wastewater from the rum industry and blackbelly sheep poo is the result of extensive research by scientists at the UWI Cave Hill campus in collaboration with Rum and Sargassum Inc. and Supernova Lab of Future Barbados. This innovation stands as testament to our campus's commitment to sustainable solutions. Another example, the UWI's Cave Hill contribution to national development through education is well known and documented. However, we nudged the needle a little further recently when we embarked on a national survey on literacy, a critical initiative aimed at addressing gaps in literacy data across Barbados. Under the supervision of Professor Dwayne Devenish and in partnership with the National Task Force on Literacy Education, which itself is chaired by UWI Education stalwart Dr. Sylvia Henry, this survey will inform future policy decisions in literacy education, contributing to the empowerment and development of our nation's citizens. And finally, as a scientist, it would be remiss of me not to remind you of the impact we continue to make in the public health arena. One of our latest initiatives at the Georgia Lean Chronic Disease Research Center is a research project in collaboration with the Shaw Center for Pediatric Excellence in Toronto. This research focused on the nutritional health and dietary habits of primary school children will be critical to help shape educational and health policies for the benefit of our young current generations and the future generations of Barbadians. These examples illustrate how the UWI CAFL campus continues to lead with impactful research which contributes not only to national development but also to regional and global discourse on sustainability. So in much the same way that Owen Arthur led the charge against the OECD's harmful tax practices, we at CAFL are committed to using our research and scholarship to inform what is right and just. We may be small in size, but we are mighty in impact. As we sit back to enjoy this evening's lecture, I urge all of you to reflect on an important question. How can we, as scholars, policymakers, business leaders, committed citizens all, work together to create a more equitable future for the Caribbean? How can we ensure that not only are our tax systems fair, but that our economies are inclusive and our growth sustainable? Ms. Dukaran's insights will no doubt provoke meaningful discussion on these questions, and I look forward to the engaging dialogue that I know will ensue. Before I make way for this evening's featured speaker, once again, I wish to welcome all of you, whether attending in person or virtually, to the 4th Annual Distinguished Owen S. Arthur Memorial Lecture. I look forward to a rich and enlightening discussion, and may Owen Arthur's legacy continue to inspire us all. Thank you.
Although we're called a bank, the Central Bank of Barbados is not like other banks. We are a statutory body, and we work alongside government to safeguard the Barbados dollar's exchange rate with the US dollar. We also work with the Financial Services Commission to monitor the entire financial system. So even though you cannot get a loan or open an account with us, we are very important and are truly committed to Barbados's continued economic growth and financial stability.
Our sponsor, the Central Bank of Barbados. Thank you, Professor Landis, for your continuing support of the SRC and these very inspiring words about what the CAFL campus is doing. Last year, an announcement was made by our esteemed third speaker, Governor Greenidge, Kevin Greenidge, to do something special. His foresight and innovative approach is the reason I'm able to introduce the second item on our program, the archiving of the Owen Arthur Special Collection. To tell you more about that is the SRC's Trade Research Fellow, Dr. Kian Skeet.
All protocols having been established, good evening to all. For those of you in our audience who parked outside of the ONS Arthur CARICOM Research Building, on the top floor of our building sits the ONS Arthur Special Collection, which was gifted to the Sidney Martin Library upon Professor Arthur's retirement and appointment to the university in 2018. Professor Arthur was immensely proud of his special collection and always welcomed students and scholars to view and utilize the collection. The special collection was not simply a place of awe and wonder, but a resource utilized on a daily basis by its owner. In 2023, in preparation for the third Distinguished Memorial Lecture, the then featured speaker, the Governor of the Central Bank of Barbados, Mr. Kevin Greenidge, inquired about accessing the Arthur Special Collection. Later, during the delivery of his lecture in this very room, Dr. Greenidge announced that the Central Bank of Barbados will work with the Street of Ramphal Center and the Cave Hill campus to organize and digitize the works and files of PM Owen Arthur so that they can be made available to the researchers to draw inspiration from. The journey of digitization requires several carefully coordinated stages, guided by key technicians from the campus archivist to the special collections librarian to the audiovisual department, including the information, communications, and technology staff, to a core cadre of academics, well supported by a very dedicated team from the Office of Infrastructural Services here on campus. Presently, we are in phase 1 of the digitization project, where the items are being transferred to their permanent location in the Sidney Martin Library. But back to the collection. What exactly is it comprised of? The gifted research inspiration from Professor Arthur comes from hundreds of pages of reports, files, speeches, meeting documents, letters, newspaper clippings, and even paintings accumulated during the years Professor Arthur served as Prime Minister, Parliamentarian, Minister of Economic Affairs, CARICOM Chairperson, and CSME Lead Head. It is hoped that in the future, the cataloging and digitization of the trade and economics items from amongst the rare reports, speeches, and correspondence would be either digitized or bound and made accessible to the wider university and the general public. In closing, I leave you with the words of the poet H.A. Vaughan, as recited by the late Professor Arthur at the conclusion of his budgetary presentation and financial statements in 2007. To the unborn leader, you who may come 100 years after our troubled bones are dust, far-seeing statesman born to lead and worthiest of the people's trust. Turn these few pages in that hour when by dark doubts you are assailed, of what it boots to shape their power. Read what we won and where we failed, and barb the word with wisdom fit, and build, oh build, where we but dream. Expose, undo, repair, extend, as you, O Master, best may deem. As we continue on this digitization project, we hope to launch phase 1 of the digitized Owen S. Arthur Special Collection to the public via the Sidney Martin Library on the UWI Cave Hill campus here. Stay tuned. I thank you.
Why should I invest in Boss Plus?
3 reasons. First, because Boss Plus offers an attractive 4.5% interest per annum. That means that if you buy a $1,000 Boss Plus bond, you'll earn $225 in interest over the 5-year maturity period. And you should know that you'll pay no withholding tax on that interest. Second, because Boss Plus bonds are flexible. While the maturity period is 5 years, you can cash them in without penalty after just 24 months. You can also sell your bonds through a broker or directly to someone else. And third, like savings bonds, Boss Plus bonds cannot be restructured. That means that the terms you buy them under will be honored. And here's a bonus reason. Boss Plus isn't only good for you. The money that you invest in Boss Plus will be used for projects that contribute to Barbados' social, economic, and environmental development.
Thank you, Central Bank, and thank you, Dr. Kayan Skeet, for your leadership on behalf of the center working on this archiving digitization project together with the teams that she mentioned on the rest of the Cave Hill campus with the support of our principal. The digitization process has taken, or the preparation, a full year to get off the ground. The team here at the Cave Hill campus, as I said, led at the SRC by Dr. Skeet, and at the Central Bank by Novaline Brewster, worked hard to prepare the MOU between the SRC and the Caveville campus and the central bank. And it is dated the 16th of September, so we really worked hard to get us here. The MOU sets up an overarching framework for cooperation with an annex for the digitization work in particular. And I did mention 75 was an important number tonight, not just because Owen Arthur would have been 75, but also because the central bank has gifted us 75,000 Barbados dollars to get this work done. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much to the central bank for your leadership and innovation. Now moving very close to the main event tonight. When we were deciding this year's distinguished speaker, we wanted to get a topic we knew would energize Owen Arthur. We wanted to also get it from a slightly different perspective, one from the private sector. Because if you see our profile from the previous 3 years, they've emanated from more government or regional bodies, the persons that we have featured. We also wanted a topic that was current, controversial possibly, and would ignite us tonight to ponder, as I mentioned, probe, and would provoke. And tonight, I am so pleased that we found the perfect speaker, Ms. Marla Dukaran, who I'm going to invite shortly to the stage to talk about one of the topics that was near and dear to the heart of Owen Arthur. And I'm going to invite the SRC's junior trade researcher, who is a friend of our distinguished guest speaker, to introduce her and introduce the topic. Let me invite Alicia Nichols to the podium to introduce Ms. Marla Dukaran.
Dr. Janive Remy, Director, Shraddha Franfal Center for International Trade Law, Policy and Services, Mistress of Ceremonies. The Honorable Sandra Husbands, Minister of State, Her Excellency Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of CARICOM, and Mr. Lloyd Pandey. His Excellency Mr. Wayne McCook, Assistant Secretary General, CARICOM. Professor Clive Landis, Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal, the UWITV campus, Mrs. Julie Arthur, wife of the late Professor the Right Honorable Owen Arthur, and members of the Arthur family, Ms. Marla Dukaran, economist and advisor, distinguished speaker, Professor Troy Lord, Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences, the UWI, members of the panel, members of the university community, representatives of CARICOM, representatives of the Central Bank, of the Afro-Exim Bank, sponsors of the 4th Distinguished Owen Arthur Memorial Lecture, specially invited guests, members of the media. Ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good evening to you all. I'm Alicia Nichols, the SRC's Junior Research Fellow, and it's truly an honor to introduce our esteemed guest speaker tonight. As our Mistress of Ceremonies would have said, this annual lecture, now in its 4th year, is a fitting occasion to commemorate and reflect on the legacy of one of Barbados's and one of the Caribbean's, if we're being honest, most distinguished statesmen, Professor of Practice and former Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Owen Seymour Arthur. Among his many contributions, Professor Arthur is remembered for his fierce advocacy on behalf of small states. As a child, I remember hearing about him with the Shipwright Agreement. I remember hearing about his strong stand against the OECD's disproportionate targeting of small developing countries as tax havens during the 1990s and 2000s. As Prime Minister, and even in his latter years, he stood unwavering in his defense of sovereignty, against one-size-fits-all policies, and in favor of small states' rights to chart their own development course in a sometimes hostile global political economy. Many of these sentiments are captured in the book, The Essential Owen, which, if you don't have this book already, I highly recommend that you get it. In a speech quoted in Sir Trevor Carmichael's article on page 35 of the book, Prime Minister Arthur is quoted as saying, "The power to tax is a sovereign right that cannot be compromised, and certainly cannot be yielded to institutions which have no standing in law to determine the tax policy of countries." He proceeded in that speech, and we all know his inimitable style and use of the English language. "We do not need the OECD nor the Financial Stability Forum to give us instructions in these matters. Neither will we prostrate nor prostitute ourselves before these institutions merely for the sake of the love of the line of least resistance." He was indeed a man of principle and a man who did not mince words. So, when we were thinking about who should be the person to address this topic, there is no one better than the esteemed Marla Dukaran. We're privileged to have her as our distinguished speaker this evening, and she's no stranger to us, but please indulge me a little while I share a little bit about this remarkable, distinguished speaker, economist, and really a lovely person to know. She's recognized as a top economist and advisor in the Caribbean. She has led discussions and published reports on the Caribbean's implications of EU blacklisting, the UN Tax Convention, Brexit, the changing US and Chinese policies, among other geopolitical developments. And in an Owen Arthur-like style, she has taken a firm stance on resolving the constraints and injustices that hinder Caribbean growth and prevent the region from achieving its socio-economic potential. Her monthly Caribbean Economic Report, which I'm sure all of us in here are familiar with, I certainly read quite avidly, is a critical tool for monitoring regional risk, vulnerabilities, and opportunities for expansion. And you can see, therefore, why Marla is a highly sought-after keynote speaker internationally on Caribbean issues. She regularly advises private sector executives and multinationals, and she has served on the government of Barbados Jobs and Investment Council, is a member of the advisory board to the UNDP's Regional Bureau for Latin America, and a board member of the Caribbean Policy Research Institute. She also sits on the board of directors of RF Holdings and Goddard Enterprises Limited, two of our sponsors. And for me, I would say she's a source of personal inspiration. I encourage us all to listen carefully, engage, bring your questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm and hearty welcome to our distinguished speaker, Marla Dukaran.
Good evening, everyone. All protocols have already been established, so I can shout out to all the trainees in the house. and the pseudo trainees or trainees by association, yes. First, I want to express my deep gratitude to the family of the late, great Owen Arthur and to the Sir Sridath Ramphal Center for the privilege and the honor of standing here before you this evening. Sadly, we lost Sir Sridath recently, and it would be remiss of me if I didn't take a moment to acknowledge him. I had the good fortune of running into Sir Ronald Sanders a couple weeks ago. This is Sir Sridath's son-in-law. And I ran into him in Wine World, no less, just after Sir Sridath's funeral. And after we lamented the state of affairs in the Caribbean, I asked him, so what to do? And Sir Ronald told me what Sir Sridath would have said. We mustn't give up. We have to keep going. And I recall fondly my last interactions with Owen Arthur during the pandemic as we sat on the government of Barbados's Jobs and Investment Council. Even during such an extraordinarily confusing and stressful time, at least for me, He managed to maintain his sense of humor, a wisdom and focus on the simple and the sensible, and an enviable imperviousness to the chaos around us. I remember listening to him. I lost my spot. Right. I remember listening to him, watching him giggle mischievously. I'm sure you all know about that. His lightness of spirit at such a scary time. And I remember thinking to myself, when I grow up, I want to be just like him. Both gentlemen have passed the baton, and it's our duty as Caribbean people to never give up and to keep going, to keep building the Caribbean into what we all know it can be, a place we never want to or need to leave, where others want to come and stay, to live, to work, and to raise their families. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Carla Barnett, Secretary General of CARICOM, and Mr. Afra Raymond, a fellow frustrated nation builder and corruption whistleblower who flew in from Trinidad just for this occasion. I am more grateful than I can express that you are both here this evening. We are here this evening to talk about tax justice in and for the Caribbean. It's a heavy topic, and it's Friday evening, so I'll try to keep it light. Pursuing tax justice for Barbados, as you would have heard earlier, and specifically dealing with those pesky folks at the OECD and the EU to get Barbados removed from various grey and black lists occupied a lot of Owen Arthur's time and energy, and I know he did not make things easy for them. Good for him. Those of us in this space are building on important groundwork that he laid. Much of what I will discuss this evening is based on a policy paper I completed for the Open Society Foundations, a global NGO which works to build vibrant and inclusive democracies whose governments are accountable to their people, and I wish to publicly thank the OSF for supporting the Caribbean. The paper, which is on my website, is entitled In Pursuit of Social, Economic, and Tax Justice in the Caribbean, Historical Context and Contemporary Realities. It's pretty long, and I've tried my best to summarize it here. So for the purpose of this exercise, I have used an exhaustive definition of the Caribbean as the 36 territories, all the way from Bermuda in the northwest to French Guiana in the southeast, including Belize, of course, in Central America. And would you believe that of these 36 territories, only 16, or 44% of us, are independent states? Meaning that the Caribbean is largely, in terms of number of territories, a colonized region. But as you know, population size varies widely by territory, from Saba with about 2,000 persons to Cuba, Haiti, and Dominican Republic, each with about 11 to 12 million persons. So by population, therefore, the Caribbean is more independent than colonized, with about 34 million of us having independence for over a century. As my first Prime Minister, Dr. Eric Williams, wrote in his book, From Columbus to Castro, the history of the Caribbean is about 30 million people scattered across an arc of islands, separated by the languages and cultures of their colonizers, but joined together nevertheless by a common heritage. For whether French, English, Dutch, Spanish, Danish, or latterly American, the nationality of their masters has made only a notional difference to the peoples of the Caribbean. The history of the Caribbean is dominated by the history of sugar, which is inseparable from the history of slavery, unquote. And this history, my friends, is fundamental to the issue of tax justice in and for the Caribbean, as well as other colonies. Colonization, slavery, and sugar production have been empirically demonstrated to have underpinned Europe's industrialization and wealth accumulation. And this wealth was, and still is, so important to Europe that the process of decolonization and independence globally gave birth to the tax frameworks that exist today in two important ways. First, it is well documented that colonizers created tax havens in the Caribbean and elsewhere to hide their sugar and slavery wealth during the independence movement. Author Vanessa Ogle said, "Such hot money departing from decolonizing empires did not simply return to France or Britain. That might involve having to share some of that wealth. Instead, disinvestment from empire during the 1950s and 60s spurred a flow of money into a number of well-known and emerging tax havens in former and ongoing dependent territories of the British Empire: the Bahamas, Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Malta, Hong Kong, Singapore, among others. Secondly, as Bahamian professor Steve Dean has repeatedly highlighted, the global tax framework is dominated by a powerful network of bilateral double tax treaties between source countries in the global south and resident countries in the global north. And it is this more than 100-year-old, 3,000-strong bilateral double tax treaty network that allows the legal avoidance of taxes, which is at the heart of the tax loss problem, and not the so-called tax havens in the Caribbean. In his book, Imposing Standards, Martin Hierson asks, in these double tax treaty negotiations, how did developing countries willingly give up their right to tax foreign companies? And based on interviews with treaty negotiators and policymakers, etc., in Africa and Asia, he found that capacity constraints and imperfect negotiation strategies, wink, wink, in developing countries were exploited by capital exporting states, shielding multinationals from taxation. Another empirical study found that, on average, treaties with EU members impose more restrictions on developing nations' ability to tax foreign companies than do other OECD countries. In fact, the UK, Italy, France, and Germany have the most tax treaties with developing countries and have the largest concentration of treaties that restrict developing countries' ability to tax inward investment. I'll repeat those four countries: the UK, Italy, France, and Germany, just so you don't forget them. My friends, there will be no tax justice, even if we eliminate all the so-called tax havens globally, including the ones in the Alps, unless we renegotiate the unfair double tax treaties that exist between EU and OECD member states on the one hand, and the global south in particular on the other hand. Because it is these bilateral treaties that prescribe how taxing rights are divided and allow the legal avoidance of taxes. The OECD, the EU, and the USA, however, have employed their powerful propaganda machinery to deliberately misrepresent the true nature of the global tax loss problem by obfuscating the primal importance of the 100-year-old 3,000-strong double tax treaty network, and the fact that OECD countries themselves are the world's most prolific tax havens. OECD members, according to the Tax Justice Network, are responsible for 78%, or $374 billion in global tax losses each year. And not only are OECD members responsible for 78% of the tax loss problem, but the Tax Justice Network reported that the OECD itself, and I quote, failed to detect and prevent its own members' corporate tax abuse, and in some cases, pushed OECD member countries to roll back their tax transparency. Yes, you heard right. Push them to roll back. That's not a soca tune. Why is the OECD doing this when they already account for 78% of the problem? And why are they coming after us when we are only 20%? And more importantly, why are we in the Caribbean falling over ourselves to comply with the OECD's demands? Why are we buying their you-know-what? The whole world, apart from Kenya, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, have swallowed the propaganda and signed on to the ridiculous global minimum tax that up to today, the US, the main sponsor of this global minimum tax, can't even legislate. I tip my hat to Kenya, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Remember those 4 countries for not falling for the OECD's foolishness. Because more than 6 decades into its existence, the OECD has still never allowed a majority Black member country to join and continues to exploit anti-Black racism to preserve its power, according to Professor Steve Dean from the Bahamas. And would you like to guess who are the 4 most scrutinized and peer-reviewed countries by the OECD, having suffered 4 peer reviews each up to June of this year? Anybody wants to guess those 4 countries? Barbados, Mauritius, the Seychelles, and Dominica. Dangerous countries. We are suffering from what is known in the international tax world as the Liberia problem, where in the year 2000, the OECD identified Liberia as a tax haven and targeted it for sanctions, when in fact Liberia was in the middle of a civil war and is microscopic in the global tax loss equation. My friends, justice of any kind is fundamentally about empowerment, specifically empowerment that enables us to no longer be victims. Victims of our past, as Dr. Eric Williams outlined, but also victims of the global North's relentless abuse of its entrenched economic and monetary hegemony, as evidenced by the hypocritical tax haven narrative they've constructed in reference to their former colonies and existing colonies, and the economic warfare still being waged on us via their double standards that Owen Arthur fought so hard against. Also, their false narratives and propaganda, and their completely indefensible blacklists. As our current Prime Minister here in Barbados testified before the US House of Representatives, and I quote, "There is criticism that Ugland House in the Cayman Islands houses over 12,000 companies. The impression given is that this could be a tax scam, without acknowledging that in the state of Delaware, there is a similar building that houses over 300,000 companies, including some of the largest in the world, such as American Airlines, Apple, eBay, Verizon, and Walmart, who are all registered there, as are more than half of the companies on the Fortune 500. There is no pressure on large economies like the United States to meet some of the standards that they try to apply to small countries. Caribbean island has become synonymous with tax haven, and the term tax haven has come to be associated with palm trees and white sand in a powerful and pervasive way, so much so that even the algorithms have adopted these false narratives. Try Googling tax haven and you will see mostly tropical island imagery. As far back as 2017, Oxfam published Blacklist or Whitewash, what a real EU blacklist of tax havens should look like if the EU were to objectively apply its own criteria. And that article revealed that 4 EU countries, Ireland, Luxembourg, Malta, and the Netherlands, would be blacklisted if the EU were to apply its own criteria to member states. Oxfam further identified 39 countries that should have been included on this EU blacklist. But in publishing this expose in 2017, Oxfam created a fake white sandy beach in Brussels, complete with palm trees and a sign saying, "Welcome to Tropico Island" in Brussels. Jokey, huh? Except that it's not funny. This is the power of propaganda and false narratives. Even those trying to tell the truth get sucked in. Only up to July 28th of this year, The Guardian UK published an editorial on the UK's tax haven issue, stating that Britain has a historic responsibility to back global attempts to properly regulate the world of offshore financial centers. And of course, the image that The Guardian chose to accompany this headline on the UK was a golden piggy bank under a palm tree. Now remember, this is an editorial about the UK, not about us. No tropical island was mentioned, but The Guardian saw it fit to use tropical island imagery. And this, my friend, is what we're up against. And the socioeconomic implications of this false narrative, those implications are severe, but we have to keep going. So, the CEO of the Tax Justice Network, Alex Cobham, Professor Steve Dean from the Bahamas, and I wrote to the editor of The Guardian to request that the image be changed and that a policy be put in place to address the inappropriate use of tropical island imagery, especially in tax-related pieces, unless the article is specifically about tropical islands. To date, we have received no response, and the golden piggy bank is still there, basking under his inflatable palm tree. The Tax Justice Network reported that secrecy jurisdictions, which are countries that provide opportunities for non-residents to hide their identity and their wealth from the rule of law, are not led by small palm-fringed islands, but by major economies. Top of the Tax Justice Network's Financial Secrecy Index 2022 is the United States, followed by Switzerland, Singapore, Hong Kong, Luxembourg, Japan, Germany, and the United Arab Emirates in the top 8 spots before we get to the highest ranked Caribbean jurisdiction, the BVI, in 9th place, followed by Guernsey, China, the Netherlands, and the UK. So remember those countries, that's according to Tax Justice Network Financial Secrecy Index. Now, here are the countries currently on the EU's list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes. And you will see how closely it matches the list of countries I just shared. American Samoa, Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, Fiji, Guam, Palau, Panama, Russia, Samoa, Trinidad and Tobago, US Virgin Islands, and Vanuatu. These EU blacklisted countries, excluding Russia, account for less than 2%, I calculated it myself, less than 2% of worldwide tax losses. So the EU is in contravention of its own proportionality principle in blacklisting these countries. And would you believe that until February of last year, the EU never blacklisted a majority white country? Russia was the first majority white and the only major economy ever blacklisted by the EU, but the EU made sure to wait until their sanctions took effect in February last year before blacklisting Russia. And this tells you what they really use these blacklists for. And isn't it absolutely shocking that the EU blacklisted Russia but not the UK for the 27 billion pounds that Russians hid in London? Also shocking that our EU and US sanctioned narco state next door neighbor with the world's largest reserves of crude oil, known for stealing elections and state-sponsored terrorism, Venezuela, in case you were wondering, has never ever been reviewed by the OECD and therefore has never appeared on any OECD or EU or even FATF blacklist. Meanwhile, my country, Trinidad and Tobago, just 6.8 miles away from Venezuela, is the only country currently rated as harmful by the OECD. We're a lot of things in Trinidad and Tobago, but I doubt we're that harmful. And we are one of only 3 countries blacklisted 3 times each by the EU, alongside Vanuatu and Panama. In fact, these are the most blacklisted countries on earth because so much money must be laundered and so much tax must be evaded in my country and in Vanuatu, a country whose GDP, by the way, resembles Haiti's. GDP per capita, I should have said. Their GDP is actually much lower. The vast majority of EU blacklisted countries are small states, naturally, but they somehow always forget to include the smallest state on earth, the Vatican. Mysteriously, the Vatican, like Venezuela, is excluded from the 165 countries subject to OECD assessments, despite ongoing financial and other scandals. I want to share a quote with you, not from Guns N' Roses, but from the head of the EU's Foreign Affairs. And I quote, "Yes, Europe is a garden. We have built a garden. Everything works. Most of the rest of the world is a jungle. And the jungle could invade the garden because the jungle has a strong growth capacity and the wall will never be high enough in order to protect the garden. The gardeners have to go to the jungle. Your duty will not be to take care of the garden itself, but of the jungle outside." You can't make this stuff up. This, my friends, is how our former colonizers see us. I want you to remember this, and remember that if we continue to be victims and see ourselves as victims, then they have won. We have been victims in the past, but it is our choice entirely if we continue to be victims of our past. We must relentlessly call out these injustices, the discrimination and the hypocrisy of our former colonizers, just as Owen Arthur did. But we must also call out, just as loudly, if not more so, the failings of our own leaders, the people we elect to make our lives better. How many of you have ever heard our Caribbean leaders mention the Africa-championed UN Tax Convention? I don't see a single, one hand. In November 2023, ahead of an historic vote on the UN Tax Convention, it was clear that for whatever reason, the Caribbean was not supportive. In fact, from what I was able to glean, most were unaware of the vote and its importance. Remember, the propaganda machinery is powerful and pervasive. The media coverage on the UN Tax Convention is minimal. I want to publicly acknowledge this evening the role of Dr. Carla Barnett, CARICOM Secretary General, who was instrumental in lobbying Caribbean leaders to support the UN Tax Convention, such that Suriname and St. Kitts and Nevis went from being opposers to being supporters. Guyana and the Bahamas went from being supporters to being leaders. Countries that had no public position, which were Haiti, Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, are now supporters. Only Dominica was absent in November, and up until now has no public position on the UN Tax Convention. Remember that Dominica was one of the 4 countries that is the most heavily scrutinized by the OECD, yet they cannot show up to vote. And apparently you can vote online. You just turn on your computer and you press a knob, and you don't have to fly to New York. There was another vote more recently on August 16th. Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, the Dominican Republic, and Grenada did not even bother to show up and vote. This is dereliction of duty of the foreign affairs people. And my country, Trinidad and Tobago, one of the most blacklisted countries on the planet, we abstained. The only country that the OECD lists as harmful. As David Rudder would say, this is not a fetin here, this is madness. Failing to support the UN Tax Convention is tantamount to supporting the OECD. Is this what we really meant to do? Not supporting the UN Tax Convention unequivocally only proves that we are not yet ready for decolonization, that we are unable to free ourselves of the puppeteer's strings or to think for ourselves and vote independently. Several Caribbean countries, Anguilla, Aruba, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, Curacao, Montserrat, Puerto Rico, Turks and Caicos Islands, and the US Virgin Islands, because they are still colonies, are excluded from the UN process. But the irony is that, one, these are countries with arguably the most at stake, because most of them are labeled tax havens. And two, their colonizers, the US, the UK, and the Netherlands, are all not just tax havens, but they are all blockers of the UN Tax Convention, alongside Canada, Japan, Israel, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, all blockers of the UN Tax Convention. All EU member states abstained in August. The majority of the Caribbean territories have no voice at the UN on an issue that is truly existential for most of them. Can you even imagine that they don't have the right to vote, and some of us who do, we don't use it? This in itself represents a huge injustice, and I urge the UN to make an exception and give the colonized territories an opportunity to be heard. And I urge the people and policymakers of the British, Dutch, and US territories in the Caribbean to reach out to the Attorney General of the Bahamas, Ryan Pinder, and use this channel available to you to have your voices heard on this existential issue that the US, the UK, the Netherlands, and the OECD more broadly are trying to silence. Remember, we may have been victims in the past, but it is up to us if we continue to be victims. I argue that tax justice in and for the Caribbean involves several key elements, but I won't have time to get into the details of each. I will attempt to summarize. First, we need an independent and objective assessment of all countries, including the Caribbean, to determine the extent to which we are truly tax havens and the extent to which we are responsible for tax losses domestically and in other countries. Note I said all countries, no exceptions, no sacred cows, not even the Vatican. And we can't have Tarzan calling us the jungle, especially not without evidence. We must prioritize the urgent and deliberate renegotiation of unfair double tax treaties that we have with the OECD and the EU member states in particular to ensure the fair distribution of taxing rights. And we must acknowledge that no global minimum tax or even the elimination of tax havens will get us any closer to achieving tax justice absent the renegotiation of these unfair tax treaties. The third thing, our domestic tax structures are overwhelmingly and in some cases increasingly regressive, and therefore they are intrinsically pro-poverty. And most Caribbean countries are not even measuring poverty, which is an injustice perpetrated on us by our own leaders, but that's for another lecture. Our tax frameworks must be reformed to be more progressive and appropriate for our level of development and institutional capacity. What Owen Arthur said in his 2002 budget speech is instructive, and I quote, "Above all, the long-term sustainable development of Barbados is best ensured with a tax regime featuring low rates, a clearly defined base, one that inspires personal and corporate initiative, and exhibits characteristics of fairness, simplicity, and equity." I could not have said it better. I've never seen it said better. In the tax justice transition, we must also ensure that the socio-economic integrity of Caribbean territories is maintained, if not strengthened. As recent events in Kenya demonstrate, unless there is consensus and popular support for any tax reform that potentially improves social conditions, we risk social and economic instability, which will undermine future tax reforms. Caribbean countries inherited an institutional foundation that was designed to be extractive of natural resource endowments and/or sugar and other agriculture production. The system was designed to extract and send back to the colonizer. And in our independent states, at least, it could be argued that in the absence of a colonial master, the extractive institutional framework and the high levels of inequality gave way to a system that supports undue influence of the political and economic elite, if not outright corruption. For the Caribbean, there is a nexus between tax justice, social justice, and climate justice. And the global North's economic gains from colonization and slavery fueled the Industrial Revolution, which released the majority of carbon into the Earth's atmosphere, which in turn is driving the climate crisis and greater socioeconomic hardship in the Caribbean. Furthermore, Caribbean countries are so capital poor so that in paying for our recovery from natural disasters and for our socioeconomic development more broadly, we have no choice but to borrow from the global North, usually at a high-risk premium based on the perception of our high risk, which is partly due to unfair and biased assessments like blacklists, but also amplified by the climate crisis. As the Bridgetown Initiative has championed, we need to rethink and reset this equation. We also need to address the structural challenges that limit the Caribbean's economic and therefore fiscal independence, such as the overdependence on food and fuel imports, which supports the interests of the global North more so than those of the Caribbean. What does the Caribbean need now? The Caribbean needs our former or existing colonizers to take their metaphorical foot off the necks of their current and existing colonies. But Caribbean countries also need to do the hard work of institutional reform to make our economies truly independent. And this is where, arguably, most Caribbean post-independence leaders have failed us. The West Indies Federation was an attempt by the British to promote regional integration towards securing Caribbean-wide food, fuel, and economic security and independence. But as we all know, this attempt failed based largely on egos, funny arithmetic, and the prevailing Anglophobia. Owen Arthur fought hard to promote regional integration, and many continue to build on his work. This is probably the most important work right now in this region. I will close with a quote from Owen Arthur's 2002 election budget presentation, in which he quoted Naipaul's opening to A Bend in the River. "The world is as it is, and men who are nothing or who allow themselves to become nothing have no place in it. It is Friday evening, my friends, and there is a lot of heaviness in the world today. Yet you chose to come here this evening to hear my rant about a very heavy topic, and I thank you for listening and for your support, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Business is an exercise in resilience and innovation, and the Caribbean region's future looks brighter than ever. It's time for medium, small, and micro enterprises to discover their fullest potential, and Caribbean Export is here to ramp up its support. We empower companies to innovate and adapt in this high-risk and competitive environment by delivering cutting-edge, high-impact, and targeted initiatives to enhance trade and promote growth. Working with MSMEs in 15 Caribbean countries to increase exports, attract investment, and create jobs. We've provided support to over 9,015 stakeholders, including providing technical assistance, business coaching, grant funding, and mentorship. You can access specialized export programs, trade intelligence, and information on financing from our Knowledge Hub. We work with you to get results. Increase sales, build and develop new products and services, export and expand into new markets, establish global networks and partnerships, transition businesses to the green economy and boost emerging sectors, drive regional integration to build resilience and sustainability in the Caribbean, and create more jobs and opportunities. Visit our website at carib-export.com and find out how you can be a part of building a resilient and transformative private sector in the Caribbean region.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you will agree that that was a very riveting presentation, as we expected by Mrs. Dukaran. So as we all know, it's Friday evening, and I know many of you are chomping at the bit with questions, so please feel free. There should be roaming mics, I believe, to indicate that you wish to ask a question. Yes, there's a roving mic going through the audience. Yes, ma'am, go ahead. And if you could state your name when you introduce yourself and your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that lecture. My name is Brenda King. Actually, I flew in from London yesterday. And
Hi, Brenda, I know you.
And Wednesday night, I heard Sir Hilary's lecture on reparations. And listening to you, you know, you can actually see the link. Just a little bit about myself, because you mentioned colonizers. I live in the UK, and prior to Brexit, I was with the EU institution, and I used to chair the EU CARIFORUM Consultative Committee. Now, you said about, you know, the UN is trying to address this, and a number of countries are unaware of the implications. What can be done to change that so that, as you said, foreign ministries are more aware of what is at stake? And secondly, are you considering linking it with the reparations debate? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I'll answer the second part first. I mean, I guess Sir Hilary and others who are involved in the reparations discussion and movement, sure, why not linking it? As a matter of fact, the UN Tax Convention was championed by the African nations. So you can see that there would be a nexus there. Whether I intend to do so, I think that's probably better left to people who know more about this than Sir Hilary than I do. But to your question about what can be done, I think the whole public awareness and education campaign that people like me, like Alicia, and so many others, I mean, it's quite a few people in this space that write about this, talk about it, blog about it, interview about it all the time. We just have to keep doing that, and hopefully the media blackout that clearly exists on coverage on the UN Tax Convention will not prevail, and you will have more and more media coverage, whether social media or traditional media coverage of the UN Tax Convention and the votes and the historic votes as they come, and that more people would be aware. I think it is also, the onus is on our governments to make sure that the foreign affairs people show up and vote. If it is a country like Dominica or my country has a specific political or other position as to why they abstain or why they don't show up to vote, that would be very interesting to find out. And I think residents or citizens of those countries need to ask questions of their policymakers. If I was a Dominican, I would be asking, why aren't we voting? We are one of the 4 countries that are the most penalized or assessed by the OECD, one of 4. Why aren't we showing up to vote for this or declaring our public position? So I think it's up to people, right, to be aware, to educate themselves, and to hold their leaders and their policymakers to account as well. We all have a responsibility in this.
Any other questions? Yes.
Good evening. Excellent presentation this evening. I wanted to ask a question. You spoke this evening very eloquently about tax justice for the Caribbean, and you mentioned separately Caribbean countries who individually had a vote. But if you're speaking about CARICOM and working together as a region, I often think that we compete against one another as Caribbean countries. And my example of that would be when Canada extended the exempt surplus arrangement to other jurisdictions who have tax rates at 0, right? So my question would be, do you see any room for the Caribbean collaborating in the future for greater harmonization of tax rates and being more united? And do you see the OECD and the others taking us more seriously if we come together as a stronger body and lobby for these positions as a collective as opposed to single Caribbean countries?
Absolutely, 100% spot on. We need to be more unified in our approach. I mean, this is why the OECD could be so strong, and they're only 38 countries, they're not that large, they're wealthy, but 38 countries, the EU as well, that's why they're so strong, because they stick together and because they have a unified front. We have, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of big egos and thin skins in the Caribbean, and maybe not enough people who put the people of the Caribbean at the front of the agenda as opposed to political maneuvering. I mean, we can talk till next week this time about all of the problems as it relates to Caribbean lack of cooperation and integration. I think, however, irrespective of that lack of cohesion and integration around this issue of tax and tax justice, we just have to look at the fact that this was championed by the African states. They were able to coalesce and champion this UN tax convention. They also were able to coalesce and take Israel to the ICJ. How come they don't have as big egos and as thin skins as we do? We have to look at the people we elect as well, right? And the kind of job that they do, and do we hold them to account for doing what we expect them to do? So again, we all have collective responsibilities, but also if we can't coalesce around an issue, each country still has a responsibility to come out and vote in whichever way they think is best for their people on an issue like this.
Good evening. My name is Mia Kamabach. I am here entirely by accident. I had no idea that this was happening, and I think that that is a huge problem that we're having. As probably one of the youngest people in the room, I think that there needs to be something done about having conversations with the youth as well, because our voices are very loud. We have an entire platform that we're dominating, the social media platform, and it doesn't seem like it's being used at its best level if, like, I'm being invited by someone else, you know? Do you think that there's a way that we can approach it on a scholarly level to make it more engaging and more interesting for the youth so that they're more interested in coming to things like this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's a boring topic, right? I appreciate that. So yes, no, you're right. I think that there is no point talking about something to a room full of people if you're going to put them to sleep. Then, you know, we can all go home and sleep. Not enough of us, especially economists, we are very bad. We are terrible at discussing topics that are technical and boring in a way that is accessible to the average person. And we have to do better at that. Professors, you know, educators, you have a role to play in sharing the ideas and the positions that are like this and the issues with the younger people and get them educated and apprised of what's happening and hopefully get them to raise their voices, right? Because the voice of the people is the voice of God, and the young people are the ones who are out there raising their voices, generally not the people of my age group. So I think all of us, again, we have to do better at that. You're very right. We have to do better.
And let me say thank you so much for coming. It really is a pleasure to see younger persons turning out. In fairness, we did promote it on social media, and I will make a shameless plug for the SRC for you to visit our social media. You could go on our website at sherida-franfalcenter.com. And we are on LinkedIn, we are on Twitter, we are on IG, we are on every platform you could think of. So feel free to follow us so that you can know about some of these other interesting lectures. Thank you so much for coming. I saw another hand several hands actually. Where's the Roman mic?
Oh, Afra has a mic. Oh, dear.
I am so sorry, Mr. Raymond. Please go right ahead.
I'm the doctor. Mala, that was excellent work. Thank you for having us and sharing your wisdom with us. I wanted to make some points. There's a tremendous tension between the current appetite for transparency, and we all have our cell phones, and we have a lot of information on the cell phone, and the overwhelming historic appetite for discretion and privacy, and for commercial confidentiality lodged within the Freedom of Information Act. So if you ask certain questions, you're told, we can't tell you that because it's the private information of this company or that taxpayer. Where we have to get to, we have to have a sense of clarity. Where we have to get to is a place called tax transparency, which is what used to be practiced in the United States before Donald Trump became a presidential candidate. He was the first candidate to suppress his tax returns. The rest of them used to publish it as a matter of course and a matter of pride. I made this much money, I paid that much tax. We have to get to that place. Because the biggest industry in the Caribbean, let's get particular now. We talked about the tension between the two tendencies. The biggest industry in the Caribbean is tourism. And it's my contention, coming out of considerable research, that the tourism sector, the hotels, the large conglomerates, the large hotels, do not pay their fair share. Some of them pay zero. Okay? Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, Honorable Lady, was actually taking on sandals and a challenge in this country. And she had to make the very important point. Barbados is a country. Barbados is not a business. Okay? Prime Minister Gaston Browne from Antigua and Barbuda, he was trying to take on sandals and a fight about the taxes that they were paying. And they locked the hotel down for 4.5 months, supposedly for renovations, a gangster thing. This is what is going on. It's a fight over our own wealth in our own region. And the region was set up to be harvested. So this is an honorable continuation of the tradition. It has definitely got a link to the reparations movement. Okay, and we have to get to the point of tax transparency, to the fact that our citizens have to understand what is happening with our money, because all of that money, every particle of money in the region, is our money. We work for it. It's our land, it's our fruit trees, it's our water, it's our electricity, it's ours. You can't go in the first world and do that kind of nonsense, which is the very central piece of Marla's work. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raymond. I have seen another hand. Yes.
Thank you. I'm living in this region, and I lived in other tax haven like Cyprus and Malta. So I have some experience of what does it mean tax haven. And I was reading recently a report from G20 about corporations that have avoided more than 1 trillion taxes. So coming back to this very, very insightful lecture, is it really the interest of the OECD countries to have a tax haven? Isn't it? And how can this be leveraged? Really, the question is, how can this be leveraged to instead, as you were saying for Africa, the same for the Caribbean region, to make this becoming the opposite, becoming, reverse this trend and make sure that the tax that has to be paid will be paid, but what is deserved to be in the region remain in the region, and maybe in regional cooperation, a leverage can be used to advocate this in favor of the region. I know if I'm clear, because I think the key here issue is the interest of the OECD countries to have tax haven.
To have tax havens?
Yes.
Yes, of course. They have the biggest tax haven.
So it's a provocative question, but to say, if there is an interest on the other side, how can they claim that this is, this is tax haven, and so that's to be, is wrong, how to say, no? So
well,
how do you see the opposite? How can you reverse this trend?
Well, here's what I think it is. So never have I advocated that we must have high taxes. I think each country has to have a tax system that works for them in light of their institutional framework, their socioeconomic development, et cetera, and also the cost of their social contract, whatever that may be. But I think the problem that I was trying to highlight is that the OECD is responsible for 78% of global tax losses. And you're right, they have the biggest tax havens. The United States is the #1 financial secrecy jurisdiction in the world. But the reason they come after us is not because they think we should have high taxes necessarily. It's because it's a competitive thing. They don't want us to compete with them. They must be the only ones to make this money this way, and we should not. We should just, sell sun, sea, sand, and whatever else, agriculture here. They don't want us to compete in an industry that they pioneered, that they're the best at. And so I think it is definitely in their interest to have tax havens, because it means that's how they make a lot of their wealth. But it's not that they have a philosophical predisposition to want tax havens in their jurisdictions and not in ours. It's purely, in my view, it's purely competitive, but it's also racist. As I mentioned, not one single predominantly black country was ever admitted to the OECD, and not one single predominantly white country was ever blacklisted by the EU until Russia. So that also tells you what the agenda could also be, but for sure, I think it's competitive. On the issue of whether or not we should tax, again, I think that's a sovereign issue. I think each country needs to decide what's best for them, and no country, especially not one if the United States, the main sponsor of the global minimum tax, for example, can't even legislate to implement that global minimum tax in their jurisdiction, how could they be the ones forcing that on us? And we have countries like the Bahamas, like Bermuda, who have already passed their legislation to adopt global minimum tax-like structures. And already we're seeing the effects of this in Bermuda, right? So again, it draws me back to the question that I asked, why are we doing this? Why are we falling over ourselves to comply with an institution that is the problem? Like my children would say to me, that's a you problem, not a me problem. So why are you coming to me with this? But I think there's a whole lot of reasons why we comply with them. As I mentioned, sometimes we just mentally, psychologically choose to be victims. We cannot see ourselves otherwise. We cannot think for ourselves. But I think also the people that we send to negotiate and to represent our countries sometimes are not sufficiently apprised or not seeking our best interests. I won't call names, but I have a friend who said, when his country passed some of this legislation, he said, it's because they take these policymakers, they drive them around in limousines, they put them on private jets, wine them and dine them in Brussels, and then they come back home and they implement these taxes. So it's a complicated issue, but I think bottom line is it's competitive and it could also be a racist thing.
Thank you, Marla. Yes, please go right ahead.
Yeah. Hi, good evening. My name is William Gordon. In about 2 weeks, I'm going to be officially a graduate from the UWITV campus in business management and marketing.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Thank you. Right, so very well done tonight, Marla. I was very impressed. You've implored us to not see ourselves as victims of our colonial past anymore. So given the jungle and garden example that you shared, would it be fair to us here in the Caribbean as people to demand stronger leadership and better policy decisions at home as opposed to something like reparations, since you alluded to many of our leaders continuing to fail us?
Absolutely, you should demand better leadership. But I think one of the things that we are not good at in the Caribbean is holding the leaders that we elect to account. How often do we make noise when they've said they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they don't do it? For example, every time a budget presentation is made, and I listen to a budget presentation that promises to do all these things, and then I compare to last year's presentation, it's a cut and paste, right? They've said the same thing in my country for at least 6 years. I don't read the budget anymore. I don't listen to it anymore because it's so repetitious. And the point I'm making is, but it's people like us, and not just people like me, an economist, it's people like you. It's everybody that needs to get on the social media, which is a platform that has democratized information and power in a way that we've never had anything like this before, and make noise and hold our leaders to account. In Jamaica, they have something called EPOC, an Economic Program Oversight Committee, which was formed maybe 12 years ago when they first started their IMF program. And this EPOC consists of opposition members, current government, NGOs, civil society. And what this EPOC does, and the chairman, Keith Duncan, who is also the president of JMMB Bank, every quarter, every 3 months, they look at what the government said it's going to do in its policy agenda, whether it's economic goals like what inflation is going to be, what is growth going to be, what is unemployment going to be, but as well as what legislation we're going to implement, et cetera, et cetera. And every quarter, Keith Duncan sits on the corner by the rum shop and tells the people of Jamaica on social media live, well, this is what they said they were going to do, and this is what they did. This is what they achieved, this is what they didn't, and this is why, and this is what they're going to have to do differently next quarter. We need mechanisms, and that's an institution that Jamaica created just about 12 years ago, 12 or 13 years ago, not that long ago. And it works in holding leaders to account for achieving the targets that they set, not us, they did. And I feel like that's a very powerful mechanism. It's something I talk about a lot. But bottom line, we need to frequently and consistently hold leaders to account for what they're supposed to be doing and what they say they're going to do. Yes, we all need an EPOC. And it's not expensive to have an EPOC. This is not rocket science. You don't need a big building. You know, we all need an e-park.
Okay, we'll take the second last question and then the last question here. So go right ahead, sir. You're the second last.
Hi, Marla. I think that was an excellent presentation. When I saw the question, tax justice for the Caribbean, I actually thought you would have talked about a more internal and, in fact, the most extractive form of our economies in the Caribbean, which is tourism, right? And it is, in some ways, a kind of plantation, a seasonal crop, and it's mostly extractive. And then I'm also looking at, we give all these tax rebates. And by the way, I'm in the hotel industry, so I'm not, you know, I have a small hotel. So, but I still think it's very extractive. And in terms of the tax justice for the Caribbean, why are we still subsidizing tourism when it is extractive? 20% of our revenue is leaked out by Expedia, by Booking.com, before it even arrives to our shores, right? And then in the banking fees and everything else, it's all extractive in the software. Why are we not, as Caribbean people, have a serious conversation, one, about a seasonal extractive economy? Can we really create meaningful jobs from tourism? And should we be slowly but surely walking away from this? And then the second thing, as in all the discourses and all the meetings that I've always come to, we're always like the inferior. Yeah? When we talk to IMF, World Bank, OECD, but when I look at three civilizations and where they started, the English Empire was a colony of the Roman Empire. Even the formation of Islam in the backwaters of Arabia was on the Persian and the Roman Empire. Why can we also in the Caribbean one day hope not to have this inferiority complex, but become imperial like England too? So I'm not sure how do we get there, but I think it is time that we really discard the inferiority complex. We have a place in this world, we have a place in this sun, and if we have to find a way to become militaristic or imperialist, do we have to follow these rules? So 2 questions. Thank you.
Okay. That was the second to last question and the last question. Okay. On the whole inferiority complex, I have this conversation with a friend of mine who's also an economist from Ireland all the time. It's this whole post-colonial PTSD, collective PTSD that we have. But you're right, at the same time, we have to be the ones to shake out of that. I mean, we have to do the hard work of that. Nobody else is going to do it for us. Maybe we need to listen to the desiderata every day. We are a child of the universe. We belong here. We have a right to be here, you know. I don't know what the answer to that is. Literally, that's not my area of expertise, but you are absolutely right. We have no reason to be feeling inferior. I don't think Owen Arthur felt in any way less when he went to shake up the OECD, right? So it's up to the individual. On the issue of tourism, don't let me get started. This is a whole other lecture. I think the tourism sector, especially the large foreign-owned properties, are net users of foreign exchange, and they are not net additions to the public purse either. But guess what? I tried to measure this. I tried to get the data, and nobody in the Caribbean is measuring the net inflow minus outflow or outflow minus inflow of foreign exchange in the tourism sector, nor the net fiscal. And that's why do you think they're not measuring? We are not measuring it. Because we know what it's going to tell us, which is why most countries in the Caribbean are not measuring poverty right now. Because we know what it's going to tell us, and it's not politically expedient to have that data, which is why it's up to each of us to make some noise in any way that we can and hold leaders to account.
And I'll hand over now to my director for her question. She'll be the last question for the evening. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Just scanning the room to make sure there are no students who I would gladly give the floor to ask questions. Thank you for representing the youth voice. Nobody? Okay. Marla, thank you for that beautiful presentation and thought-provoking set of facts that you presented to us. I just wanted to briefly ask you about what seems to be the predominant framework within the region for dealing with tax and tax constructs, which is the base erosion and profit shifting initiatives. And I know you spoke a lot in your speech about the UN initiative and what's happening there as being led by a lot of these countries, especially from Africa, that has enjoyed some support. But we are moving ahead in the region, including in Barbados, in implementing the global minimum tax and the BEPS. I just wanted to know if that's, in your view, considered view, really a step in the wrong direction. Would you suggest we stop and wait for what's happening at the UN? Because it's a little bit difficult to reconcile what we seem to be doing against what you seem to be suggesting we should be doing.
I'm pretty sure if Owen Arthur was still here, he would say, hell no, we're not doing this. I mean, why would you when they're not even, the US is the main sponsor of this, and they're not even able to legislate it. We were not at the table when it was decided that this is how we're going to move ahead with global tax loss problems. We didn't have a voice. So for you to then come and tell us we need to do this when in fact you yourself haven't done it, and when in fact you haven't had a dialogue with me about what could work, there might be a better solution. And that's what the UN Tax Convention is trying to achieve, where all voices, well, not all, the colonies, of course, don't have a voice, but this at least is a forum where all countries can put their perspective on the table and say, this is how I feel this should look. And every country then has that opportunity to help shape whatever agreement they finally arrive at. And also, it has to be that there is a consideration for different countries at different levels of development. It cannot be, imagine when the global minimum tax was agreed, the country that said, we need 10 years to implement this, was not any country in the Caribbean. The country that asked for the most time to implement the global minimum tax was, guess who? Switzerland. They asked for 10 years. Why we didn't ask for 10 years? You know, it's completely ridiculous that we are still attempting to comply with something that they're trying to force down our throats that they themselves haven't implemented. I think it's an absolute mistake that Bermuda has already done it. Bahamas is implementing a corporate tax. The thing is, if you want tax revenue, then you can do something else to raise revenue. You don't have to do this. And I urge all policymakers to rethink this approach of complying with the OECD.
All right, thank you so much, Marla. And I will just wrap up by noting a few of the things that you mentioned. It will be remiss of me as an academic not to note the post-colonial theoretical framing that you used for your analysis, the colonial roots and antecedents of the tax system that we have in the region, the power asymmetries that you mentioned in the DTAs, which are reflective of those power hierarchies that we have to maneuver, the do as I say, not as I do approach that these countries are taking to us, the fact that our countries, and I found it so interesting that two of those countries, Barbados and Mauritius, which are the two countries I am studying for my PhD research, as you know, are among those countries. The construction of a tax haven as a tropical island. As you were talking, I was thinking about that book by John Grisham, The Whisperer. I don't know if any of you, the audience, have read it.
When you have time to read John Grisham?
I find the time. you know, he mentioned Barbados as one of the countries that the corrupt judge was using to hide his money, and I just found that so egregious. And I have never looked at a John Grisham book the same way again after that. You know, so I also like the fact that you reference not just the ways in which this is unfair to us, but also the fact that this makes us seen as risky, and it also has economic implications for us. And I liked not just your call to action and that reminder to us that we have agency. We have colleagues in the African Union, around the world, that we could work with. The system does not have to be skewed in the favor of the global north. And lastly, I like the fact that you outline some key elements of what you see as tax justice. And I am a big fan of your work, and I look forward to continue reading your works on these areas. So, audience, thank you so much for your great questions. And Marla, thank you so much for such a wonderful lecture. And at this time, I'll hand over now to the Mistress of Ceremonies.
And thanking our very own Alicia Nichols, who we've heard is in the throes of her PhD. Great framing. You make us proud, Alicia, our junior research fellow and one of the lecturers on our faculty. So what's the answer? Tax justice for the Caribbean? Who says yes? Yes, we have tax justice for the Caribbean. Who says no? Marla, we should have put this as a debate for mooting. Okay, thank you so much for doing justice again to Owen Arthur's legacy, his thinking, and I could see him sitting right here with his impish grin saying, well done, well played. Just as a very small token of our appreciation, Marla, let me invite our MITP Masters in Trade Policy, International Trade Policy at the SRC, our alum, Mr. Christian Kendall Rock, who is a trade, tourism, and culture specialist, to just give you a very small token of our appreciation for doing us the honor of feeding our minds, provoking, probing, pondering tonight. So thank you so much. Thank you, Marla. Maybe, Christian, you can escort Ms. Ducran to her seat. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Allow me now, at our next agenda program item, to do what we do every year, slightly different placement this year, but by no means an afterthought. We want to acknowledge the continuing support of the Arthur family to this lecture series and to all the things we do at the SRC. She's one of the first people, Ms. Arthur, that we consult as we put these on every year. And every year she comes with her family to support our night of honoring her late husband, Owen Seymour Arthur. So again, Ms. Arthur, if you would come up on the stage, as you always do. And I will ask the Barbados Female Caribbean Youth Ambassador, Ms. Ashley Lashley, who is a 25-year-old Barbadian UNICEF Youth Advocate and CARICOM Youth Ambassador, dedicated to social development in health, environmental issues, and the rights of children and women, to do us the honor of presenting Mrs. Julie Arthur and her family with a bouquet of flowers as a token of our appreciation and the love we continue to feel for you and your family. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ashley. Now to the penultimate event on our program, This year, as I mentioned, we decided to shake things up a little bit tonight and to go out to the private sector and our regional institutions and our business houses in Barbados and across the region to help us in the sponsorship of tonight's event. We not only were soliciting the financial support, but also the feeling of having this business community to support the work that we continue to do in honor of Owen Arthur. And we had a very special idea in mind, not just to sponsor tonight's event, but thinking much more concretely. I mentioned today we wanted to honor the legacy of Owen Arthur. One of the things he cared so much about was to instilling the youth with independent thinking and giving them an opportunity to advocate and to shine. And so we went to our sponsors, not just to help us with hosting tonight's event, but also with contributing towards an inaugural Owen Arthur Scholarship Fund. And they came back with money as well as their support. So on behalf of the board and the management and the staff of the SRC, let me thank, please, give me a rousing welcome and thank you to our sponsors. And I will mention, you will have seen already some of their small short interventions on stage between the items. But let me thank once again the Central Bank of Barbados, Goddard's Enterprises, the RF Merchant Bank and Trust, Unicoma, and Caribbean Export Development Agency, and invite the representatives who are with us tonight to come to the stage to get a small token again of our appreciation. Let me invite to the stage Dr. Dami Sinan, the Executive Director of Caribbean Export Development Agency, Mr. Charles Herbert, Chairman of Goddard's Enterprises Limited, and Ms. Jillian Nunes, President and CEO of RF Merchant Bank and Trust. And we don't have with us, unfortunately, a representative of Unicoma and the Central Bank, but we know they are with us in spirit. I don't know if Ms. Nunes is with us, but perhaps not. So just accept a small token of our appreciation. This is a way of encouraging others next year to also support our memorial lecture. And I'm going to invite Professor Troy Lord, who is the Dean of the Social Sciences faculty, to award them with our small tokens of appreciation. Right. Dr. Sinan, thank you. And Mr. Charles Herban, Chairman of Goddard's Enterprises. Thank you. We'll take the pictures with the sponsors afterwards. So we have now arrived at the final item of our agenda. As you can imagine, putting on this event takes a lot of hard work. And while I have the floor, I'm going to pass on to Professor Lord. Let me just thank everyone, and in particular the team at the SRC, for making us look good. But I will hand over now to Professor Lord after we see the final presentation by one of our sponsors to give the formal vote of thanks.
Life is full of complicated things. Trading in the Barbados stock market doesn't have to be one of them. As a registered broker in the Barbados Stock Exchange, RF is your direct line to buying and selling shares in publicly traded companies. And with the convenience of trading with just a call or email, free custody of all your securities, and access to investment opportunities right as they come to market. With RF, you're going to love the way you trade. Get started today at rfgroup.com. RF, money at work.
Good night, everyone. Okay, all protocols have been established. It is my simple task to bring some closing remarks to tonight's distinguished lecture by our guest, Ms. Marla Dakaran. First, we have sincere thanks expressed to the family of the late Professor the Right Honorable Owen Seymour Arthur for consenting to and participating in the convening of this distinguished lecture series. Many thanks to Marla for your willingness to present at this distinguished memorial lecture. Your lecture on tax justice for the Caribbean was captivating, inspiring, and honestly, we need a part 2. To the team at the Central Bank of Barbados, the Caribbean Export Development Agency, Goddard's Enterprises Limited, RF Trust and Merchant Bank, and Unicommerce Group, our valued sponsors, allow me on behalf of the board and management of the Shudaf Ramphel Center to extend our eternal gratitude as we continue to co-partner on this annual event, as we remember Professor Arthur as a Caribbean son, an ardent regionalist, a strong voice for small and vulnerable economies, a fearless defender of national sovereignty, a bold leader, and an inspirational mentor. To you, the live and online audience, many thanks for joining us tonight as we explore the arguments surrounding tax justice for the Caribbean. As we continue to be inspired and reflective on what we have heard tonight, the entire team of the Shudaf Ramphel Center, Dr. Kayan Skeet, Ms. Danielle Knight, Ms. Claudel Ford, Ms. Alicia Nichols, Ms. Adiela Lewis, and the wider campus community will continue to chart a path forward to face and fix the region's ongoing challenges. We want to thank you to the UWI. We want to thank you to the EBCCI team for this excellent venue. Just one last thing I have to do now is to invite you to join us in the foyer for light refreshments as we conclude tonight's proceedings. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.